Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, we have Aimee Knight.
Hey, from Nashville.
AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live, sleepless in Provo.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Rene Rubalcava.
Yeah, that's right. How you doing?
Doing all right. Do you want to just give a brief introduction, who you are, where you're from, tell me how to really say your name, all that stuff?
And is that a real beard or a microphone?
No, that's my full-on beard, man. Got the grays coming in perfectly and everything.
Oh, wow. We should do a Kickstarter where you get a microphone that looks like that beard. Right?
My name is Rene Rubalcava. I am a software developer at ESRI. I like to emphasize the where, like where you are, because I work in spatial and geo. I'm out of Redlands over here, where ESRI is headquarters. Mm-hmm. And I do a lot of development, JavaScript development and so on.
Nice. Get Datadog for visibility into your entire application from browser to the codebase and all the way down to the infrastructure. Get proactively alerted on any client-side issues such as JavaScript and network issues. Optimize the load time on your front-end resources and detect any UI issues that affect critical user journeys. Discover that it isn't a front-end problem? You can tie all this information to corresponding back-end traces, code-level errors, infrastructure-level metrics, and even related logs in seconds without any querying. Try it out today here. https://DTDG, that's Datadog without the vowels, .co/JavaScript Jabber. So I'm kind of curious just to get rolling. I had seen stuff from ESRI, man, how long has it been now? Like 10 years? Maybe not that long. Anyway, when I went freelance, it's been 9 years, because we were working on some location services stuff at my job. It was all in Ruby, but it was still just interesting stuff. And I think we used a library or something that ESRI had written or something like that.
Yes, I mean, they've, so ESRI itself has been around since 1969. So 50 years so far, right? I mean, it would have been great to have been like 16 years old in 1969. I think that'd been cool, but around I'm not really sure how long ago. I mean, I guess around sometime before 2000 or so, they started moving from the desktop space, this is where most of their software was at the time, to more server-based. Back then, I mean, Google Maps came out and was like the big push for getting web maps to consumers and everything like that. So ESRI got into the space in terms of web mapping and stuff, and they started providing some of the things you probably worked with are services that do directions and routing, location, search for an address, or give me a bunch of coordinates and we'll give you a bunch of addresses back. Those are kind of the basic kind of services. And those are really fun and really cool to work with. And since then, we've just exploded in terms of the type of services that are provided on the web. Back then, we had Flex and Silverlight APIs when Flex and Silverlight.
Good old days.
The future of the web, right? You could do anything in Flash. Everything worked great.
Yeah, the company I was at, we were using Flex and Flash. So
yeah, I was a big Flex user. I was so sad when Flex died. But like most Flex developers moved on to JavaScript, and I think today we're just catching up with what Flex and Flash was able to do back then, which is a lot of fun. But we've had our JavaScript API out. It's over 10 years now, I believe, from version 1, and we're now in version 4 of our API. So it's been a lot of fun. I myself have been with ESRI only for about 4 years now, but I've been using the products probably since around 2002, 2003 or so.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting too, just when you start working with location information. Now, we didn't do routing. What we did at that company was, in fact, I wonder if they're still there, but I just haven't heard anything about them for a while, but it was crimereports.com.
Okay.
And so what we did is, it's a 404, so it's gone. Anyway, so what we did is we provided location-based services for law enforcement agencies. And so basically what you would run into is things like, so they would put all their crime data in. So of course we had to be compliant because it's government data. But then it would show all the crime locations on the map and then show them like heat maps. So this is where these kinds of crimes occur and all that kind of thing. And it was always interesting because then people could go in on crimereports.com and they could put in basically a polygon. And we can talk about polygons and points on a map and all that stuff in a minute. but they essentially draw a shape on the map. And then we would send them reports if there were crimes that occurred within that geographic area. So if they had some kind of delineated neighborhood or something like that, it would, give them reports on that kind of thing. So if a lot of garages were getting broken into or something like that, they'd see it, they'd get reported, and then, they could let their neighborhood know, hey, a lot of garages are getting broken into in our neighborhood. So go check it out. Make sure your garage is closed every night and things like that. So
yeah, it's a really good use case for it. I mean, it's one of those powerful ways to be able to use that location data to do something a bit more, other than just show up some points on the map, actually make it useful in some way that is good for people that are going to be consuming it, which is really neat.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that we try to focus on a lot. We're always concerned about how are people using these tools and everything that we're doing, and what are the goals they want to achieve with what we're building. We like to say sometimes that we write software for developers that write software to make awesome users, right? So it's kind of our end goal at that point.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just to get us rolling. I mean, how because a lot of this stuff is kind of baked in my head at this point, because I did so much stuff with it. It was a long time ago. But how do you think about location and mapping today if you're building software around that stuff? Like, what do you have to understand or think about that's sort of outside of the norm of the rest of software development? So
basically, when you're dealing with location data it's points on a map, and a lot of times those points can be turned into lines, streets, networks, utilities. Polygons basically differentiate things like regions, some sort of boundaries of some sort of buildings are really useful. But when people are coming into it, maybe they're building apps, and at some point they find out that they need to incorporate some sort of location for some reason. It's usually because they've got some data sets that need to be analyzed a bit more, right? Maybe more than moving things from a spreadsheet into another type of a visualization to kind of give it more impact or tell another story with it. And that's kind of where working with web mapping and mapping apps kind of comes into play, right? So now you can take these CSV files you might already have, some Excel sheets and stuff, and you can start turning those into these really cool looking maps that not only look cool, but they also tell a story, or they provide some sort of information to people that need to make decisions, for example. And that could be city leaders, that could be people running retail stores that are trying to find new locations to put stores at. Those are kind of things that they work with. If you are looking for where your customers are, for example, you run some sort of a business for that, you can analyze where people live that are buying your product, what are the demographics of those areas, how much money do they spend on not just your product, but how much money are they spending on similar items like entertainment, for example. So there's all these different pieces that come into play when you start getting into it and working with this location data, which is really neat.
Yeah, it's really cool. AJ and Aimee, have either of you done much with location type work?
I have not really. I feel like the most that I've done is just tracking IPs and stuff like that, which doesn't necessarily have to do with your location.
Well, Chuck, funny you ask. Let me tell you a little bit about time zones in Postgres.
I kind of felt that one coming, out there in the ether.
I haven't done a whole lot with normal locations. Well, not normal. I think time zones is pretty normal. But I haven't done a lot with like geolocation type stuff. I've tinkered around with it once or twice, but I've never built something useful. And I suppose I lament that, because there's so much cool stuff you can do with geo APIs.
Yep.
So, time zones in particular do become an issue for us as well sometimes, because if someone, for example, they store time in their data set, and maybe someone, got a parking ticket at a certain time of day or something like that. It's fine if you're at the location where you got it, but maybe you've got people remote working on the same data that are in different time zone completely. So the browser tells us, we know what your time zone you're in, everything like that. But maybe they want to change their time zones so that they can see the data from where it was originated from. So we've got to handle all these different use cases where people maybe in different time zones but want to see the data in another time zone. So that always gets complicated.
Oh my goodness. And it's such a nicer story now in JavaScript. Whereas before you had to have 8 megabytes of moment.js in the time zones file. You can actually do that kind of stuff now in about 10 lines of JavaScript.
Yeah, that's really cool. The new INTL and everything like that makes everything really nice.
Yeah, I've been complaining about this for such a long time. Like, long-time listeners, I don't know why you haven't yelled at me and told me that like INTL is now ready. But yeah, it's stupid. It's a convoluted, complicated API that does things completely backwards from the way that you think about them. But you can set a time zone, set a time, and then work backwards to the original thing that you wanted. So huzzah.
And it works in IE11, which is the best part for all those poor developers that still need to support IE11, like me.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm curious about, and something that I want to dive into a little bit, is there were a few things that I ran into when we were building crime reports. One of them was that we had different coordinate systems depending on who was sending us the data, and some of it was based on like which spheroid they used to model the Earth.
Yeah.
And then it was, okay, well, we don't want latitude and longitude because they're these big giant numbers that don't mean anything to us. So they would set up their own coordinate system in their town or city or whatever, and then they'd have these complicated shapes that kind of mapped out the edges of the city. So let's start with the spheroids. What are the different models for the Earth? Because a lot of times we kind of plot the map as though it's flat, and it's not. It's a sphere.
Exactly.
But it's not a perfect sphere, so then we have different ways of modeling that and math.
So, I mean, the analogy everyone always uses is you take like an orange and imagine trying to peel that orange in such a way that you can flatten it out, right? So there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You basically just imagine peeling the map off of a globe, and how would you flatten that map out into a flat surface? So there's various ways you can do that kind of, depending on what you're trying to do with your map, can, make certain regions larger than others. For example, the poles are always larger than everything else. We look at these flat maps. And when you're working in a local zone, so maybe you're zoomed into a particular city, there's different, they call it projections you can use to kind of make it so that your city is kind of the focal point. And then the further away you get from that, things start to get distorted from there. So it's always when you get data from different sources, for example, maybe one city sends data to another city, and everyone maybe in a county, or most of the time it happens if you're working across state agencies and stuff, you'll get somebody from the northern part of the state to the southern part of the state, and it's a different coordinate system, and you got to get everything to kind of play together nicely. So what we try to do with our ArcGIS JavaScript API is we have which is really kind of cool, we have an engine, a projection engine that can actually convert from one projection to the other. And like you said, the math to do that is pretty complicated. I can't do it. I'm not smart enough to do that math myself, so I use these tools and everything to do it. But to get that projection engine working, we had to compile it from C into WebAssembly, and we used that inside of our API to do all of that work for us and stuff, which is really cool. So if you load data with JavaScript API and it's from different projections, we can go ahead and reproject all that data to be the same inside your map. So everything kind of just lines up and works really nicely. And to you never know the difference, which is really kind of cool. And it's one of those things that anyone that's ever worked with napkin libraries come across. And most libraries can handle some sort of reprojection either by some sort of other projection library or a service that they can use to reproject their data.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what we were doing, because we would get, like you said, some of these projections. So it would, it was for a very small area for a city, and just the city limits, right? So if you think of like LA, you've got all the little cities and around it as well, all the suburbs, and so those might be handled by a different jurisdiction, and so they just cared about the things just inside their little lines. And they'd send it over to us, and then we'd have to reproject it into latitude, longitude, so that we could show it on our maps.
the thing that seems common to me is the same mapping system that Google uses for Google Maps. It's also the same system that's used for OpenStreetMaps, for Bing Maps, for Yahoo Maps. It seems like most mapping systems, at least that I've worked with, have converged on that.
Yes.
And that is actually a fairly simple algorithm. Like I liked it.
So Web Mercator is pretty much with all the everyone's kind of, that's what we kind of standardize on for web-based maps, is everyone kind of uses Web Mercator. Data that you get maybe from like your GPS, if you've got like one of those a watch that can track when you go running or something like that, those are normally in what's called WGS84. That's your regular lat long, which is close to Web Mercator but not quite. But it's pretty simple to convert those into these Web Mercator coordinates that Google Maps and everyone uses, and we use that as well. The issue is that we have a lot of customers that the source of their data is in these other projections and stuff. So we have to convert that projection into this Web Mercator so that it plays well with everything else everyone else does. But most people do publish most of their data that they're putting out there as a Web Mercator or as this WGS84 that can be converted pretty easily to Web Mercator. And that's probably the most popular one you'll find is a WGS84 format. Like I said, that's what you get off of these GPS devices and everything else that are pretty easy to share.
Yeah, and those work really well, I think, for kind of the general areas where you don't know exactly where somebody's going to be, and so you kind of need a system that works everywhere. But what I found with the crime data was that they had it transformed such to where it would print really nicely on a map they could put on the wall or things like that. And so it gave them a little more fine-grained control to use some other system that, yeah, like you said, it distorts once you're a ways out of town, but
yeah,
it's really, really accurate for when you're not.
And there are some where the measurements are in feet, but there's some older ones where the measurements were done in meters. So I think there's going to be another update to one of these projections pretty soon for new measurements done. I'm not sure what the status that is, but we have to deal with all that too, because some people have these older data sets that were never re-projected and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to kind of make sure all that works as well. I think it's interesting because you have the land surveyors, right? So land surveyors are very accurate with all of their measurements. And then, some people will convert that over into something that can be mapped along with all the other data sets you might have. So that's always a lot of fun.
Yep. So, yeah, the other thing that we had was just figuring out how to put, is this point inside of a polygon?
Yeah.
A shape on the map. And that's really all it is. If people are wondering what a polygon is, it's literally just a list of points, and you just then connect the dots all the way around the shape, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, does ArcGIS provide for that? Like if I have a map and I have, maybe I have the shape over, my town or my state or something like that, and then I just throw a point on the map, can it tell me if it's inside that polygon?
Yeah, we have that built into our API, and that's powered by, we call it a geometry engine. And it's basically this API that we have in our API that lets you do things like, is my point in a polygon, for example, or the distance between 2 points. We can also do, if you have multiple polygons, merge them all together, or maybe find the area where 2 polygons overlap, which is always really interesting to use. And these are the kind of tools that are really nice because you can use something like this geometry engine to do some really cool client-side analysis of the data. So if you maybe want to kind of, you have a lot of this overlapping data, like say you have parcels on top of census blocks, for example. Well, and then you have land use data. This is always really interesting. So land use data is nice because it tells you whether or not this area is going to be commercial property or residential, for example. So now you can clip out the parcels that where people live, and you can take the census data that tells you population and start assigning population numbers to those individual parcels based on the land use data itself. So now you get this really detailed data sets from these 3 other data sets that you've done, right? And that's kind of a pretty popular workflow that a lot of people do for different types of analysis. And then once you've got that, you have these parcels with the population numbers. You want to get really detailed, you can use building data sets that will show you the number of buildings on a parcel. And maybe it's an apartment building. kind of thing, and you could kind of start figuring out, the percentage of people that live in different buildings on top of these parcels. And there's going to be some flaws and everything with that, but it's still kind of a cool analysis you can do inside of your applications. And all this can be done on the fly in the browser with the JavaScript API, right? You don't necessarily need to use any kind of server tooling to do this, although you could. We try and provide all of this really cool client-side capabilities for users to take advantage of, which just makes it easier for them to build these really cool apps and stuff to get things done for people.
Makes sense. So one thing that I never did, and you kind of brought it up, is routing.
Yeah, that's always a popular one.
Is that much different from, just having points on a map that maybe follow the highway, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, it gets a little interesting because, for example, you can say you want to route from your house to the airport, but maybe you want to stop and get something to eat as well. So you can add a point for where that location might be. And you can do the routing based on certain times of day, for example, as well. So maybe you're going to be leaving at like 3 p.m. And the way that our routing API works on the server side and everything is that it kind of takes historical traffic data to kind of figure out what historically the traffic's been like at that time of day to kind of give you these good estimates of how long it's going to take you to get from your location to go eat and then get to the airport at a certain time, kind of thing. And it's pretty similar to the same kind of stuff that Google will do and everything, where you can, I'm not sure with Google you can map multiple locations. I can't remember anymore. But what makes it useful for stuff that we do, for example, is we have customers that have their own data for routing. So they might have these private streets on properties that they use.
Mm-hmm.
So they can add these private streets into the regular street network. And now we can help them route around certain ways. It's really useful for delivery companies that need to route around, figure out the best route to get from multiple locations, right? So imagine you're doing a route to 15 locations in one day. What's going to be the optimal route for you to start and finish your day based on where you need to go, right? So all of that just kind of helps people figure out the best way to get places. And of course, it saves money in the long run, because that's saving money on gas and maintenance and everything, which is really cool. But routing is really important. People use it a lot. We use it on a daily basis just with our phones, right? Without even realizing it most of the time. A lot of the stuff we take advantage of these days. It's just really cool technology.
Yeah, that's true. That's another thing that's interesting to me is when I was working on this kind of stuff, smartphones were pretty new, right?
Yeah.
So not everybody had a GPS in their pocket. In fact, I remember we had an actual GPS unit in our car, right? That we had bought third party and, stuck to the windshield. And, now, you just pull your phone out and tell it where you want to go. So has that changed? Has that changed mapping these days? I guess you have larger data sets and
exactly.
people use it differently.
I think people today use it without even knowing it most of the time, because it comes into play in so many different ways. Like you said, because everyone's got a GPS and all kinds of different devices, your phones, your watches, your car, and everything. There's just way more data that's out there that's being used for different purposes. And sometimes if you install these apps on your phone for like a department store or some store you go shopping at, you may notice as soon as you walk in the store, you start getting these alerts for coupons kind of thing, right? So there are if you're familiar with beacons, like indoor beacons and stuff that you can use that can help. They send out these little messages to your devices and everything, and then kind of track where you are at the store. It's just everywhere these days. Location is just used in a number of different ways, and it's just remarkable how it's just part of what we do on a regular basis without even realizing it.
Yep.
And one of the things that we make sure not to do with our API at all is that we don't. So if you use the JavaScript API, we don't collect any sort of telemetry data. It's not like if you use our API to build like an app, there's nothing coming back to us with any information at all. If you want to use like Google Analytics or some other kind of a telemetry service to kind of track an app that you're building yourself, you can do that. But as far as we're concerned, that's not part of what we care about at all.
That's good to know.
One of those privacy things, right? Everyone's worried about privacy today, but you're being tracked everywhere anyway.
Well, we say everyone, but it seems like it's a smallish subset of people. but then they're very concerned. But I think it's just a matter of time though before there's some major thing that happens. Somebody gets stalked and something horrible happens to them because that data wasn't properly secured or something like that. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, if someone were to get a hold of, some device that you use that does your regular tracking, and then someone figures out what your regular schedule's like or something, I mean, that's a big risk, right? So.
Yeah, and I could see that becoming an issue then where then everybody's like, okay, well, the easiest way for us to secure our data is to not give it up.
Yeah, which is always tough. It's always opt out in a lot of these cases, never really an opt in kind of thing.
That's one of the reasons I don't use any of the Google Home or Amazon or like anything that sits in your home. And I mean, I know that there are devices that I'm not aware are monitoring me. Like I get really freaked out when Siri just chimes up all of a sudden because I'm like, I didn't realize I had Siri always listening, but apparently that's a thing now. But I try to limit those types of things because I find it concerning, because this stuff, it gets in the news all the time. And I don't like the idea that someone would have full access to my house because I decided to install a thermostat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Even the microwaves and stoves are connected today, right? So everything's on Wi-Fi and stuff. You don't know exactly what kind of data is being sent over.
Yeah. Well, I have an Amazon Echo in like every room of my house. So
yeah, I got the Alexa in my kitchen, so I can't really complain.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, they're super convenient, but yeah, eventually I think something's going to happen and some of these privacy concerns are going to really become an issue. So what kinds of things have you seen people doing? I mean, you kind of mentioned the, sort of the land use type scenario. Are there other things that you're seeing people doing with mapping data and location data?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a large variety. In terms of like what our customers do, we have people that are, a lot of people are building apps for like cities, state agencies, and they'll do these applications that doing public notice kind of things. So maybe there's going to be new development and they need the public input on, what is your feedback on putting in some new shopping center somewhere or something like that. We've got a lot of customers doing like trying to find retail locations. If you are trying to place a store somewhere, the routing comes into play quite a bit because we've got people doing the whole delivery thing and trying to figure out where optimal routes are going to go. And we have a lot of people doing just really cool visualization stuff with our stuff for various purposes, maybe research work or something like that, because we do regular 2D mapping. We also have 3D as part of our API as well. So you can show the whole globe. And that brings into place some really cool visualizations you can do in terms of like extruding points off of the globe. So make these really cool looking visualizations, adjusting I'm not a cartographer, so I can't make great looking maps, but people can do some really cool things with based on the colors and everything that they do to make these really nice looking maps and everything. Trail maps are really popular, right? So those kind of things are cool. But yeah, they do some really cool stuff. And one of the things that we have a term for one of our features we have in the API called smart mapping. All right, so basically, if you're a developer and you want to make a nice looking map, but you're not exactly a cartographer, you can give us your data, kind of tell us, I'm interested in some population numbers. I have a field for population, and maybe I got a field for the amount of money that people make, income or something like that. And you give us those two fields and we'll go ahead and create a nice looking colors and everything visualization for the data. And we don't just do it for the data, but we also look at what base map you're using. So if you're using like a dark base map, then there's going to be different color schemes used for that. Or if you're using a street one or a gray light base map, then there's different color schemes for that. So we figure out everything that you're doing in your map and then give you a really nice looking visualization for your data. And we can do all kinds of really cool stuff. We can figure out, so if you're interested in what is the relationship between endangered species and population numbers or industrial growth kind of thing. And you can make a really cool visualization based on those two relationships, which is a nice looking map. So we have all these really cool capabilities that users are using to make just really interesting looking maps, which is cool, in 2D and 3D. And there's some really cool examples out there for 3D stuff that we have a developer out in Zurich. We have an office out there that does some really cool stuff. She's put together a bunch of things, Raluca here. But yeah,
that's cool.
3D stuff is nice.
Yeah, I can just see AJ plotting his route to the moon or something with 3D.
No, it's funny you mentioned that. We do have we've had agencies mapping planets, for example. Like I think I know I've heard they map Mars. Can't remember anything else they did. Maybe the moon, but it is something that people are doing, mapping out all this different data. That now we have all this really cool stuff coming in from all these probe stuff we've sent up. We're getting this cool data sets coming in. So people are doing some really cool stuff with that. And we talked about trying to work with these projections, just across like different states. I mean, they do some really interesting things for these projections on different planets, which is cool.
That's really cool. I've been reading The Expanse, so that's what's going through my head is
okay.
Mapping my way out to the ring.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can also imagine then like mapping buildings and things like that, right? So this office is right here, and
yeah, we do a lot of that. We have indoor routing too. So I mean, we could even do something like if I'm in my office here and I need to get to another office that's in a part of the building I haven't been to before, you can do that kind of routing, and that'll route you downstairs or tell you to go down this hallway kind of thing. That can get pretty detailed as well.
Yeah.
Even with the 3D, I mean, we can show you the, if you have like office layouts, you can put in the 3D models kind of, they're going to be this number of chairs and these meeting rooms and these number of desks and stuff like that. And
yep.
Kind of play with it and say, oh, I want to take these chairs out or rearrange these walls or something like that, which is kind of cool. That's like a planning type stuff that people use for mapping. That's really popular too. If you want to plan out what your city might look like in, say, 2050, you can do those kind of plans and stuff. And they put that kind of data together for that stuff. That's really cool.
Yeah, very cool. I don't know if I have any other questions or things to bring up. Aimee, AJ?
I do not.
All right. If people want to follow what ESRI's doing or see what you're doing online, Rene, where do they go?
So you can go to developers.arcgis.com and you can see all of the development tools that platform. I have my own site at odoe.net, and that pretty much links out to my Twitter, my GitHub, my YouTube, and everything else that I do, which is a lot of stuff. So they can always check me out there. We have our blogs at blogs.esri.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can always find stuff there. And then, I myself, I'm going to be at Half Stack, New York next month. I think we're going to be sponsoring TSConf in November as well.
Oh, nice.
We're big TypeScript users over here for our whole API. It's about almost 100% TypeScript at this point.
Yeah, everybody here loves TypeScript, right, AJ?
Oh man, it burns. It burns. Just so good.
We had some stragglers at the beginning, but everybody's on board now over here. I mean, we had to convert a very large library from just all pure JavaScript to TypeScript when we started moving to it. And we've got a few files left, but we're just about done. So we've gotten a huge benefit from it. We really dig it.
Nice. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io. All right, well, the final segment of this show is picks. So I'm going to go ahead and let Aimee give us some picks.
Okay, I'm just going to go with something that looked pretty good on Hacker News. Advice to less experienced developers. I feel like, if nothing else, a lot of this stuff kind of starts to sound the same, but if you hear it enough, hopefully people will start to believe it and take it to heart. And I don't know, just that I'm, at work, I'm kind of being given like more and more responsibility and starting to work in more of like a mentorship leadership role. And it's really interesting to kind of be working with folks and like guiding them and seeing a lot of the questions that they ask are things that I've asked in the past. And I just always think it's like, even if you've been doing this a while now, it's helpful to read this kind of stuff to kind of keep yourself in check and, never forget what it was like to be a beginner. And that'll be it for me. Nice.
AJ, what are your picks?
So I'm picking INTL because it gives you the name of the time zone that the user is in, which is amazing, and it's well supported. I'm also going to link to a library that I'm working on. Right now, it's worthless. It's just like some stubs, but probably by the time it gets published, it'll be worth looking at for handling, basically figuring out if a time is valid in a time zone. Like, for example, there are ambiguous times, like 2:30 a.m. can either not exist or can exist twice, depending on what time zone you're in and what day it is. And then I'm also, so it's not fun because databases aren't intended to store things like time zones because time zones have to be computed. Ask not what your database can compute for you, but what you can compute for your database. But that said, Postgres does have enough utility that you can work with time zones in Postgres. It's hairy and it looks nasty, but I'm going to link to a Stack Overflow post for doing that. And I'm also going to pick a movie that my wife got me for Father's Day because I asked for it, because I saw it on Amazon. It looked interesting, called Colorful. It's an anime. It's pretty PG-13 in the true sense of the word, not meaning like, whoa, that's really PG-13, but it's like maybe a coming of age type movie that basically talks about it's kind of interesting. I mean, I find Asian films interesting because the way they present stories is more about resolving a problem, and you got to be like 3/4 the way through the movie before you even have any idea what's going on or why you're watching it, which I think is actually cool. But it's kind of about the concept of how people are not binary in their behaviors of I'm either this type of person or that type of person, but we have conflicting ideals that shape who we are. And I kind of see it as somewhat of a forgiveness story, although I don't think most people would probably label it as such. That's kind of what it seemed like to me. And the animation style was beautiful, and I enjoyed it. And it was like $10, so pretty good deal, I think. And it's called Colorful.
Nice. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of my own. One is I'm going to be running a 5K in a couple weeks. This is kind of a fitness test is what my running coach called it. Then I've been running much further than that on my regular daily runs. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'm running the Heber half. Of course, I'm running the 5K, not the half marathon. But anyway, looking forward to that. That's going to be up in Heber, Utah. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Of course, by the time this goes live, it might already be over. One other thing that I'm going to pick, and this is something that I've been working on for a while, moving the devchat.tv website over to a statically generated site. It presented a couple of things. One was that I needed a good way for my non-technical show notes writers to write the show notes and submit them. A lot of them aren't familiar with Git, which is the way that I've been adding stuff to the repo. Anyway, I've been using Netlify to host the staging setup for the new website. It'll probably go live this week. But yeah, Netlify has a CMS, and the CMS works with your static site generator like Hugo or 11D is what I'm using. I just configured it, and then it automatically picked all that stuff up, which is really cool. So Netlify CMS is another pick. One last pick that I have, this is something that I played with my brother and sister-in-law last night, was Villainous, which is a game where you play Disney villains, and you essentially, everybody's a different villain. And so, each villain has their own story. And so they're trying to circumvent their fate, essentially. And so, for Ursula, she has to capture the crown and the trident and defeat Triton. For Captain Hook, you have to find the Lost Boys hideout, which is locked when you start. So you have to unlock it. And then you have to get Peter Pan out and, get him to the Jolly Roger and defeat him. And anyway, so you're trying to complete your quest before anyone else. And anyway, it's fun. So Prince John, he has to get 20 power, which are kind of the little coins. So anyway, so you can play fate cards on the other players, and that's like heroes or effects that hurt them. And so, yeah, you're trying to be the first one to get your objective done. And it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm enjoying that as well. And then I don't know if I mentioned this last time or if I mentioned it on my JavaScript story, but I switched browsers from Chrome to Firefox recently. And the main reason was that Firefox comes with two features that are rather important to me. And it's something that I had installed browser extensions on Chrome to get. One of them was that it blocks autoplay for videos by default.
Yes.
I know, it's so nice. And then the other one is that they've added in some of the security features that you get from things like Privacy Badger and stuff like that. And so anyway, a lot of the do not track behavior is just built into Firefox now. And so I switched over because I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to pick those. Rene, what are your picks?
All right. So I'm going to have to go with a book series I've been reading recently. I haven't finished it yet. Old Man's War by John Scalzi. So it's a sci-fi series. I don't want to spoil too much, but basically people from Earth, when they reach the age of 75, they sign up to join the military because they are promised that they can serve 10 years, and they don't know how, but they are youthful again when they do. So the first book was really great, and I'm now in the second to the last book. I think there's like 5 or 6 books right now. And I've been plowing right through them on my Audible for like the past month and a half. And I'm just having a real good time with it. I think if you enjoy sci-fi in any way, it's a great series to check out. So I'm having a lot of fun there. My other pick is actually going to be a movie, just because I thought it was hilarious. I saw recently was it's on Netflix, Always Be My Maybe. And it's a comedy, but it's worth it because it has the greatest Keanu Reeves, like 15, 20 minutes that you'll ever see in a movie. It's worth it just for that alone. Keanu is just fantastic in that bit. It's hilarious. So I'd go with those two.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for coming, Rene, and talking to us. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully it helps some people get some ideas around mapping and location.
Awesome. Thank you. It was great being here.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, folks, and we will be back next week.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.